The Red Keep smelled of smoke and fear. The hallways echoed with the panicked shouts of servants running for their lives, and the heavy boots of gold cloaks turning traitor or dying for loyalty. Fire licked the base of the Tower of the Hand, and King's Landing trembled under the weight of a rebellion that had reached its gates. Yet deep in the throne room, the Mad King sat high on his iron throne, fingers stained with soot, eyes wild and fevered. Jaime Lannister stood below him, armor bloodied, sweat running down his youthful face. He had been just a boy of 17, but today was meant to be the day he became something more than a Kingsguard. He had seen what Aerys was doing, ordering wildfire to be set beneath the city, preparing to burn it all. He had listened to Rossart whisper madness into the king's ears. He had planned to stop him. He had planned to kill him. But he hesitated. He thought he had time. He thought that the crown's madness could still be stopped by words or threat. What he didn't expect was that Aerys had been watching him too. The Mad King hadn't missed the way Jaime's hand drifted too often to the hilt of his sword. He saw the defiance in the boy's eyes, the lack of fear. And if there was one thing Aerys feared more than Robert Baratheon's hammer, it was betrayal from within. "You were your father's son all along," the king said, voice like rusted steel. "Tywin betrayed me, and now you dare draw steel, in my presence?" Jaime stepped forward, face flushed. "I swore to protect the realm, not to watch you burn it to the ground." The king's laugh cracked through the throne room like breaking glass. He stood slowly, robes dragging, crown tilted slightly on his head. "Protect the realm? You? A golden boy with a lion's pride and a traitor's heart?" Before Jaime could react, the doors burst open. Rossart and a handful of pyromancers entered, and behind them, Ser Jonathor Darry and Ser Barristan Selmy. Jaime looked to Barristan, begging silently for help. But Selmy didn't move. His jaw was clenched, his eyes downcast. The order had already been given. Rossart whispered something too low for Jaime to hear, and then the flames came. It was not wildfire, not yet, but real fire, summoned by torch and blade. Darry and two guards grabbed Jaime by the arms, his sword stripped away. He screamed, fought, but he was still just a boy. Aerys approached him slowly, dragging a rusted sword across the stone floor. "A lion cub with sharp teeth," Aerys whispered. "But even lions burn." Jaime's scream echoed through the Red Keep as Aerys plunged the sword into his chest, not a clean death, but a slow one. And when Jaime fell, bleeding out before the Iron Throne, the king bent down and whispered, his final judgment, "Burn them all." By the time Tywin Lannister stormed the gates with his army, the lion banners high, the treachery already done. It was too late. The city was already burning from within. Wildfire barrels detonated beneath the great sept. Smoke rose in columns from the Street of Silk. The smell of charred flesh clung to every stone wall. There was no Kingslayer, no betrayal of Aerys, only a dead golden boy at the foot of the throne, and a mad king who laughed as the city collapsed. Robert Baratheon entered a city in ruins, not triumph. There were no Targaryen corpses to parade, only survivors hidden in the ashes. Ilya Martell and her children were not killed by Gregor Clegane, for Tywin had arrived too late to earn Robert's favor that way. Instead, Rhaegar's children escaped into the chaos, smuggled away by Varys, or others unknown. Cersei Lannister stood at the gates of the Red Keep, a 19-year-old girl with blood on her hands and smoke in her hair. When she found Jaime's body, she did not weep. She did not scream. She changed, and the world would feel it. The bells of the Red Keep tolled for 3 days, not for celebration, but mourning and madness. The corpse of Jaime Lannister was wrapped in a blood-soaked Kingsguard cloak and laid in the ruined sept of Baelor, what was left of it. Cersei stood over him, hands clenched into trembling fists, her green eyes staring with a hatred that no one in Westeros had ever seen in a woman so young. She didn't speak at his funeral. She didn't cry. She only listened, to the silence, to the whispers, to the lies. They say he tried to kill the king. He turned traitor. He paid the price. The truth twisted and spat back in her face, ignited something inside her. Jaime was her twin, her other half, and in death, he had been made a traitor. By the same realm he swore to protect. Her father, Lord Tywin, had said little. He had arrived too late, his army finding only fire and corpses, his golden son dead. His plan to win the rebellion with honor crushed under Aerys's insanity. Tywin withdrew quickly after that, not out of shame, but to regroup. He took Cersei back to Casterly Rock, but the girl he brought home was not the same. She didn't speak much anymore. She watched, she listened, and she planned. The war ended as all wars do, in dust and thrones. Robert Baratheon took the crown, but not the glory. The people never sang of his triumph, only of the fire that consumed the capital and the king who laughed as it burned. Robert married Cersei as a gesture of peace between House Baratheon and House Lannister, but it was a hollow match. Robert was drunk more days than not, and Cersei hated him from the moment she looked into his eyes and saw no soul. In her wedding bed, she whispered Jaime's name, not out of longing but vengeance. The realm had taken everything from her, and now she would take everything from it. She learned quickly how power worked, how it wore smiles in daylight and knives at night. She befriended Littlefinger and Varys, but never trusted either. She kept her own counsel, and slowly filled the royal court with men loyal not to the king but to her father, and by extension to her. She began manipulating Robert, then controlling him. It was easy. He wanted wine. She gave it. He wanted women. She looked away, and in the background she pulled strings no one even noticed. Years passed. Her children were born, though none of them bore the blood of Baratheon. She made sure of that. Robert's drunken lust disgusted her, and if she could not have Jaime, no man would truly touch her again. She chose others, discreet, convenient, but never loved them. She loved only one ghost. Her children, golden-haired and beautiful, were her revenge. They would inherit a world built on lies and silence, the same world that murdered her brother and branded him traitor. But history has a way of clinging to truth, no matter how much gold you pour over it. In the north, Ned Stark heard rumors. The Mad King had killed Jaime, not the other way around. That wildfire had burned innocent people alive. That Elia Martell's children might still live. That Rhaegar's true heir might have been taken across the narrow sea. And then came whispers from across the sea, of a silver-haired girl with dragons, of a boy with purple eyes and a claim stronger than Robert's, of fire that once fell upon King's Landing, threatening to rise again. Cersei watched it all from her high tower in the Red Keep, wine in hand, eyes like daggers. She had clawed her way into power through ashes, and she would not let it slip. Not for dragons, not for bastards, not for ghosts of a family long gone. She had buried her brother once, she would bury kingdoms now. Winterfell was quiet, wrapped in snow and secrets. Eddard Stark stood in the Godswood, cold breath rising from his lips, a letter in hand and dread in his chest. The parchment had come in silence, slipped into his study by a servant too afraid to speak. No seal, no signature, only one sentence written in shaky ink. The lion died and the king burned the realm. Ned had seen the flames in King's Landing with his own eyes all those years ago. He had ridden in behind Robert, stepping over, blackened bones and ruined stone, but he'd never known what truly happened that day, or perhaps he had never wanted to. The official history said Jaime Lannister tried to kill the king, failed, and paid with his life. But there were other whispers now, from pyromancers, from old retainers who'd escaped the burning, from Lord Varys, whose spies slithered into the north more often than snow fell. The truth was dangerous, and if it was true that the Mad King had killed Jaime before Robert's forces even arrived, then everything had changed. Aerys had never been stopped. He had burned half the city before he died at the hands of his own pyromancers, gone too far in his madness even for them to obey. No Kingslayer, no redemption, just fire and death. Ned crumpled the letter and looked up at the pale heart-tree. He thought of Robert, of the throne he had taken with blood and ale, of Cersei and her dead-eyed children, each with hair the colour of Jaime Lannister. He thought of Jon Arryn, dead before he could tell him the truth, of Lyanna, buried beneath Winterfell. The past wasn't dead. It had only been buried under the wrong name. Far across the sea in the red sands of Essos, another fire had been lit. Daenerys Targaryen stood atop a balcony in Meereen, her dragons circling above, wings wide and terrifying. She had heard the stories, that her father burned the capital, that he laughed as people screamed, but now new stories reached her ears, ones that made her chest twist with cold. "They say your father killed the lion cub first," said Ser Jorah, standing beside her. She turned to him, eyes unreadable. "Jaime Lannister," he nodded. "They say he was the only one who tried to stop the wildfire, that he died a hero." She said nothing for a long time. Then finally, "And yet my house still fell. My family still died. My brother was still hunted like a dog." "Truth doesn't matter in war," Jorah said. "Only who survives to tell the tale." Daenerys looked down at the streets of Meereen and her jaw clenched. If her father truly was a monster, then she would not follow his path. But if the world had lied, if the realm had used her family's fall to justify their own sins, then perhaps they didn't deserve her mercy. "Let them hear us," she said. "Let them know that House Targaryen remembers." Back in Westeros, Cersei watched from the Red Keep, her spies whispering in her ears of ships crossing the sea, of dragons growing large enough to blacken the sky. She was not afraid. Fear had died with Jaime. But she was ready. She had ruled beside Robert, then behind him, then above him. And when Robert died, drunk and gored by a boar no one truly believed was an accident, she ruled alone. Now her son sat on the throne, Tommen, sweet, soft-spoken Tommen, wearing a crown far too big for his head, but it was her hand that moved the pieces, her word that built the alliances, her shadow that loomed larger than any king's, and when the dragons came, she would be the one to meet them. For she had learned one truth that even wildfire could not destroy. If you want peace, bury the truth. If you want power, burn the rest. The sky over Blackwater Bay had darkened, not with storm clouds, but with wings. The dragons came at dawn. Their screeches tore through the air like fury given form, and fire rained down upon the ships of the royal fleet before the first horn could be blown. Daenerys Targaryen, Stormborn, breaker of chains, and rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms, had returned not as a frightened girl, but as vengeance in flesh. From the ramparts of the Red Keep, Cersei watched the city burn once again, just as it had all those years ago when Jaime died on those very stones. But this time, there was no mad king laughing on the throne, no Robert with his hammer, only her, and her legacy hanging by a thread. Tommen trembled beside her, gripping the rail, too soft for the moment. He turned to his mother with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Mother, what do we do?" Cersei didn't blink. "We survive." She turned on her heel, robes sweeping behind her, and barked orders like a general gone mad. "Seal the gates, arm the scorpions, bring Qyburn to me." Qyburn, her last weapon, the one man who understood her need to destroy rather than negotiate. In the dungeons, his monstrous creation, Sir Gregor Clegane, or what was left of him, waited in silence. Cersei had no more illusions about honor or gods. She only believed in firepower and secrets. As the dragons burned the outer districts of the city, and Dothraki screamed into the gates on horseback, Qyburn revealed the final card in her hand. Caches of wildfire, older than memory, buried beneath the city since the days of the Mad King. "The Mad King planted the seeds," he whispered. "You need only water them." She stared at him. A smile, small and cruel, tugged at her lips. Outside the walls, Daenerys had landed. Jon Snow rode beside her now, his northern soldiers clashing with the remnants of the Lannister army. The Golden Company, bought with Lannister gold, had been shattered in moments by dragonfire. The city was falling, and Daenerys could feel the victory, taste it. The people chanted her name. But in the distance, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Green flames, not dragonfire. Not hers. Wildfire. The explosion that followed was unlike anything seen since the Mad King's death. A quarter of the city, the poorest districts near Flea Bottom, were erased in a heartbeat, turned to dust and bone, thousands incinerated. Smoke rose so high it blackened the morning sun. Jon Snow staggered back from the blast, horror in his eyes. Daenerys screamed, not from fear, but fury. "She burns her own people?" "Yes," Jon said, "and she'll burn us too." Inside the Red Keep, Cersei watched the mushroom cloud rise and her eyes were alight. Let the Dragon Queen taste the same madness they blamed my family for. But this wasn't like last time. Jaime wasn't here to stop the flames. Tywin wasn't at the gates to pretend at mercy. There was only Cersei, a ghost of a girl who lost her brother under a mad king, now using that same madness to rewrite history. The city burned again. Only this time, no one would call it madness. They would call it war. Cersei had wanted to make the realm bleed for what it did to Jaime, for how it made him a villain when all he did was try to save them. And now, she had succeeded. The people choked on ash. The bells tolled again, not for surrender, but as a funeral dirge for a kingdom that had lost its soul. Daenerys, heartbroken and livid, landed her dragon on the steps of the Red Keep. She didn't wait. She didn't ask for surrender. She walked into the throne room, blackened and cracked, just like the day Jaime died there, and found Cersei waiting alone. No guards, no soldiers, just a queen wrapped in wine-colored silk, a goblet in hand. "I've been expecting you," Cersei said. "Do you surrender?" Daenerys asked. Cersei smiled. "No, but I wanted to see your eyes before I died. I wanted to know if they were like his." "Whose?" "Your father's," she whispered, "or mine." Then she drank the poison in her goblet and dropped it at Daenerys' feet, her smile never leaving her face. She had lost, but not before making the realm suffer, not before proving one final bitter truth. When the lion died, the realm burned. The ashes settled like snow on the ruins of King's Landing. Where once stood towering keeps, bustling markets and ancient stone, now lay rubble soaked in soot, blood, and regret. Daenerys stood before the Iron Throne, or what remained of it, a twisted carcass of melted swords and broken oaths. She didn't move for a long time. The room, still reeking of wildfire and death, echoed with ghosts, her father's laughter, the screams of innocence, and somewhere in her mind, the voice of a young knight who never got the chance to defy. A king, Jaime Lannister, the boy who tried to save the realm and failed, whose death had unchained a legacy of fire that now circled back to her. How different might everything have been if he'd lived long enough to swing his sword. If the realm had listened before it was too late. Behind her, Jon Snow stepped through the shattered doors, bloodied and weary. He had fought his own men to stop the slaughter, had pleaded with Daenerys not to become what her father was, but fate doesn't always care about pleas. Or honor, or love. "You won," he said softly. Daenerys didn't turn. "No one wins, Jon." He looked around the throne room. "You burned half the city." "She did." Her voice cracked. "Cersei. She made me the villain. Just like they made my father. Just like they made Jaime." Jon's jaw clenched. "So now we blame the dead?" "No," she said. "I blame the living." She turned to him, eyes rimmed red. "They cheered when my brother Viserys was crowned with molten gold. They looked away when Elia Martell was butchered. They believed lies about Jaime because it was easier than facing the truth. This realm doesn't want peace, Jon. It wants fire. It just doesn't want to admit it." He looked at her for a long moment, then down at the sword at his hip. "What will you do now?" Daenerys exhaled slowly. "Break the wheel, not with words, but fire. The houses that let this happen will kneel or fall. I will burn the history that made monsters and martyrs out of the same men." And in that moment, Jon saw it, the same fire that once lived in Aerys, not mad, not yet, but burning with the same righteousness that justified slaughter, far to the west. Word spread like wind through the trees. The north wept for the loss of its king's honor. The Vale closed its gates. Dawn murmured of rebellion. And the people, the same ones who had once prayed for freedom, now whispered in fear of another tyrant in a crown. At Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister's crypt was untouched by war, but not by legacy. Cersei's children were gone, his bloodline broken. The House of Lannister, once proud and powerful, had become a ghost. And Jaime, who died trying to stop the madness, had become nothing more than a footnote in the twisted tales of history. But Brienne of Tarth remembered. She returned to the ruined throne room weeks later, stepping over shattered stone with tears in her eyes. She had heard everything, from the small folk, from soldiers who remembered the boy with the golden sword who tried to stop the king and paid with his life. She knelt where he had fallen, pulled out a battered book, the white book of the Kingsguard, and opened it to the page where his name had once sat nearly blank, and she wrote, "Sir Jaime Lannister died trying to stop King Aerys from destroying the capital with wildfire. He sacrificed his life not out of treachery but out of honor. The realm never knew, but he knew, and it is enough." She closed the book, stood slowly, and whispered, "You were the only one who tried." Outside, the world moved on. New kings would rise, new wars would come. But the truth hidden beneath ashes and lies would always remain. When the lion died, the realm burned, not because he failed, but because no one else was brave enough to follow him.